Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last session of the Forest Restoration webinar series before the summer break, not the last session in general, but before the summer break. And as you are already aware, this series is organized jointly by the SUPERB project and by IUFRO's task force, Transforming Forest Landscapes for Future Climates and Human Well-Being. And I'm Gesche Schifferdecker. I'm your moderator today, leading the communications work in SUPERB. And today we have a very exciting session with 3 speakers, and we will find some answers to the question what restoration practitioners can learn from activities around forest and forest restoration on the web and social media. And we will have, as I already announced, 3 speakers. We will have our superb colleagues, Jonathan Gray, who's a senior lecturer in critical infrastructure studies at King's College London, and Liliana Bounegru, who's also a lecturer in digital methods at King's College London, as well as Rina Tsubaki, who's a communications manager with European Forest Institute. And they will discuss with us today how we will use online data and digital humanities-based methods to explore how restoration and other forest-related issues are engaged with on the web, like, for instance, Google, Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms. And we will also discuss examples on a variety of forest-related issues and practices, including, for instance, forest fires, forest bathing, rewilding, which is also a big topic, and of course, forest restoration. Next slide, please. And the housekeeping, of course, is important. This webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available, hopefully make it available afterwards to watch on the EFI YouTube account and on the IUFRO website. And if you have questions to the panelists, please use the dedicated Q&A box that you will see in the on the bottom of your Zoom. And after the presentations, we will promote selected participants to speakers so that you can ask your questions live, which makes it a little more engaging and vivid. If you want to tweet about the webinar, that would be great. And then you could also tag us using both IUFRO and SUPERB project. And now it's time for the exciting presentation. We will learn a lot and be surprised. I'm pretty sure about that. And I'm happy to hand over now to, who will start? Will it be, okay, it will be Jonathan. Wonderful.
Hello, everyone. Just to check, you can hear me okay and see the slides?
Perfectly.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about digital media, forests and society, and various collaborative research projects that we've been doing to explore the relationship between these over the past several years. So there are 4 things that we would like to cover today. First of all, a brief introduction to who we are and what we do, and the kind of background to this work that we've been doing on SUPERB. A look at some of our previous work on digital media and environmental politics, a preview of work in progress from SUPERB, looking at digital media and forest restoration, and finally, some reflections and next steps leading into the Q&A and discussion afterwards. So firstly, who are we? This is our little digital methods group, which is Liliana, Gabriella, Rina and I, and we have been working together as part of the SUPERB project on upscaling forest restoration with the focus on online mapping work as part of broader activities around stakeholder engagement, communication and outreach activities. So I'm senior lecturer at King's College London in the Department of Digital Humanities, director of the Centre for Digital Culture, and co-founder of the Public Data Lab, which we'll be saying a little more about in just a moment. And apart from the work we're presenting today, I'm finishing a book on public data practices, editing an issue on critical technical practices, and undertaking collaborative research on online mobilizations of East and Southeast Asian communities in the UK, as well as looking at arts-based digital methods for engaged research. So joining me today is Liliana Bounegru, who's lecturer in digital methods, also at the Department of Digital Humanities in King's College London, and also a co-founder of the Public Data Lab. And Liliana specializes in internet studies, digital media and culture, science and technology studies, and digital research methods. And this is Rina Tsubaki, who's a communications manager at the European Forest Institute, and I'm sure many of you will know her, who has worked on the Lookout Station at the FI, as well as several projects on journalistic reporting and media capacity building, and who has been working very closely with us on the digital methods, research design and implementation around mapping engagement around forests and forest issues. So Liliana and I co-founded the Public Data Lab together with Tommaso Venturini in 2017. The Public Data Lab is an interdisciplinary network exploring what difference the digital makes in attending to public problems. So we develop materials, formats for collective inquiry with and about digital data, digital methods, and digital infrastructures. So currently there are over 160 people associated with the lab. And this group really grew out of a network of research centers in London, Amsterdam, Paris, Milan, Copenhagen, Geneva, and beyond. But it's largely kind of European based. So we've worked with a variety of different groups and organizations, including media organizations, wildlife charities, advocacy groups, public institutions, and many others, in order to explore the role of digital media in relation to issues that they work on, as well as to develop ways of working with digital materials that are relevant to the interests and concerns of these groups. We've also been exploring how research and students can work with groups outside of universities in what we call collective inquiry or co-inquiry, which is part of how some of the work we'll be presenting today has been developed. And over the past several years, we have been undertaking several research projects with the Public Data Lab, exploring how digital technologies and practices shape how we know and respond to environmental changes and ecologies such as forests. So this work that we've been doing contributes to and is inspired by recent research on digital technologies and ecologies. As Jennifer Cabrice at the University of Cambridge writes, forests are becoming highly digital environments, which I'm sure many of you will know. Doing forest restoration work, there are all kinds of techniques, infrastructures, devices involved in how we know forests. So members of the Digital Ecologies Research Group say that digital technologies increasingly mediate human and non-human relations in diverse settings, including environmental governance, surveillance, and entertainment, as well as commenting that nature is becoming ever more difficult to distinguish from the digital tools and media we use to observe, interpret, and manage it. So in addition to technologies such as satellites, drones, and sensors, the web and social media are increasingly becoming sites of knowing, reporting on, and interacting with ecologies such as forests. Indeed, as we note in a forthcoming chapter for a book on digital ecologies, forest fires are implicated with the emergence of hashtagging as a live social media posting practice. So the first widely recognized use of the hashtag on Twitter was said to be a San Diego fire in relation to the 2007 forest fires in San Diego, which is interesting. At the same time, digital technologies are also changing how research is done and how we understand culture, society, and the world around us. Digital tools, sites, and methods are becoming part of how we know and how we do research in many fields. As Liliana and her co-authors write in a recent paper, in the last few years, websites and online platforms have come to occupy an increasingly important role in environmental and particularly climate communication. It has also been argued that new media interactions leave traces which provide opportunities for researchers. But as new media scholars also argue, the character of these online interactions and traces depends on the configuration of relationships between users, technologies, business models, governance structures, and so on of these various platforms. And different platforms are associated with different kinds of cultures and practices. So as you'll know, for example, if you've compared videos on YouTube to videos on TikTok, right? There's a different kind of platform style to these kinds of videos. Or if you compare, for example, posts on Twitter and on Instagram. So the digital methods of research approach that we draw on aims to repurpose or reuse online material from the web and social media platforms for social and cultural inquiry. It encourages a research imagination which starts by following online media and seeing what kinds of materials and interactions are available to be repurposed or reused for research, such as, for example, links, likes, hashtags, mentions, recommendation networks, and so on. So ways of doing things online are reused in order to do social and cultural research. As we'll see later in the context of the Superb project, we've selected online platforms based on which are being used in the countries where we have forest restoration demo sites and where we can get data from. So the Public Data Lab is not just about researchers studying these kinds of online materials, but also about documenting and sharing approaches and methods which can be used by many different kinds of social actors, such as journalists, advocacy groups, community organizations, and others. So for example, in this project, we're very interested in equipping forest restoration groups to use these kinds of methods as well. So as we go through the rest of this presentation, we invite you to consider how might these kinds of methods and approaches be relevant for you, your work, your field, your organization, and so on. And that's perhaps something we can return to at the end of the presentation today.
That was who we are and what we do. So hopefully that gives you a bit more of a sense of what we specialize in. And now we'll move on to the second part of this talk. And here I would like to give you some examples of projects we did around digital media and environmental politics. The first example comes from a collaboration with a sociologist of the IPCC. And in this study, we looked at how the release of the IPCC special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees played out on YouTube. We studied the ranking of videos about the report on YouTube day by day for 1 month after the release of the report. And one of the things that we found was a mix of professional and user-generated videos, as well as some climate change denial videos that were being returned for keywords related to this report. We also studied the themes in these videos and found 4 main recurring themes. The first was disaster and impacts. The second was policy options and solutions. The third one was political and ideological struggles around climate change. And the first theme was contested science. And in the case of videos about SR15, the discussion of policy options and solutions was particularly prominent, unlike discussions around previous IPCC reports. If you would like to read more about this, there is an article that we published based on this work, and you can find the link on this slide. The second project I would like to mention is a collaboration with the EFI around mapping online engagement with the 2019 Amazon forest fires. This project resulted in a number of reports and research publications, which you can see on the slide. And the general question that we were interested in this project was, how are social media platforms shaping forest fires? To address this question, we collected data around a set of English language hashtags that got a lot of attention in the media. And we focused our analysis on a 10-day period of peak Twitter activity in the early phases of this event. One of the things that we did was to look at the most prominent hashtags per day associated with Amazon fires. We found that there are many issues that are being articulated around this event. So we found discussions around climate and environmental issues, around food issues, around indigenous community issues, fact-checking and misinformation, and so on. And as you can also see from the graph on this slide, there was also a substantive drop-off in public attention on Twitter over the course of the period we researched. We also looked at the most shared images associated with the Amazon fires across a number of different social media platforms. So in this particular study, we looked at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Google Images. And what we found was that each platform presented the event differently. For example, Twitter showed the most diverse visual formats, while Google Images presented homogeneous visual imagery. For example, professional photographs of forest fires. If you would like to learn more about this project, we have published 3 articles and reports about this work, which you can find on this slide. The third project I will briefly mention is also one of my personal favorites. It is about mapping everyday engagements with diseased ash trees on Twitter. This project was a collaboration with the Surrey Wildlife Trust in the UK, and it was undertaken with students in our social media classes at KCL. And the slides that I am presenting here are prepared by the students for their final presentations. As you can see, the student group names on the slide. So as you can see, they all chose animal names for this particular course. So students looked at a collection of tweets that contained keywords related to ash tree health over a 9-month period. And one of the questions that they looked at was, what is the most engaged with content about diseased ash trees on Twitter? They closely read the most retweeted tweets, which is what you can see on this slide, to examine how Twitter users were reporting about ash trees month by month. They found that the most engaged with content had to do with the health of these trees, but there was also content about the representation of these trees in British folklore, as well as about people's everyday encounters with these trees on their walks. Forestry and scientific expertise was also present, as well as local council announcements regarding incidents involving ash trees. Another thing that the students did was to examine the hashtags used to report about the state of ash trees. To do that, they did a co-hashtag network to look at how Twitter hashtags about ash trees relate to each other. And they discovered that there are several different hashtag communities active across the UK, US, and Australia. These include local communities, nature lovers who report on ash trees during their nature walks, and also expert communities interested in causes of this disease and also responses. If you are interested to learn more on how we work with students and external organizations to do such work, we have an article describing this process, which you can find on this slide. Similarly, with our students, we did a collaboration with the UK-based NGO Global Witness around nature-based solutions on Twitter. we collected data containing nature-based solutions keywords on Twitter from 2006 to 2020. And one of the things that the students did was to look at the most engaged with content about nature-based solutions over time. They found that the concept started to gain traction on Twitter from September 2017 and has been steadily increasing since then. In our data set, activity peaked in September 2019. And the most retweeted tweet in this period is from Greta Thunberg announcing a movie about nature restoration. And again, this is a collaboration with students in our classes at KCL and the Surrey Wildlife Trust in the UK. We collected data on rewilding on Twitter between 2006 and 2021. And one of the things that the students looked at, again, was the most engaged with content about rewilding over time. They found a steady increase in content on Twitter about rewilding since May 2013. And the peak in our data set is October 2021. The tweet that is most prominently retweeted in this period is from Rewild, a biodiversity and conservation initiative. So that was very, very briefly some of the research we have done on digital media and environmental politics. So I will now move on to the third part of this talk, where we would like to share some of the work we are currently doing around digital media, forest restoration, and society. This work covers both research and art-like experiments around digital media and forests. And all of this is work in progress, as you will see. These are some of the questions we explore in this work on digital media and forest restoration. So the kinds of questions that we are interested in are: how are forest restoration practices and narratives represented on the web? How are forest restoration sites engaged with on social media? And how can we repurpose digital media to develop engagement formats around forest politics? So in general, our work is about studying science and technology in society. And more specifically, about studying and situating forest restoration in society by means of studying media practices around it. Situating science and technology in society is described as deepening commitments to empiricism or knowing the world through observation. As feminist scholar Donna Haraway writes, it aims to support a more adequate, richer, better account of a world in order to live in it well. And I will now hand over to Rina.
Yes, great. Thank you, Liliana. So in the context of Superb, we are studying online engagement around forest restoration using data from different digital platforms. Oh, yeah. And then one of the things that we are doing is to map forest restoration on Twitter. So for this, we are taking 3 starting points for data collection, namely the generic, without specifying any location name, European, and restoration site level to get a holistic overview on Twitter engagement around forest restoration. So I wanted to share a few insights into what we discovered so far from this exploration. Let's first turn to the generic level engagement first, where we wanted to answer the question, what are the most prominent hashtags per month associated with forest restoration on Twitter? To do so, we used Twitter API to collect data covering 3-month period in 2022 using forest restoration related queries. What we discovered here is that campaign hashtags, including non-forest related ones, promoted forest and restoration activities, as seen in Rally for Rivers hashtag, an awareness campaign hashtag for India's depleting rivers. Forest restoration issues were also brought up on the international days, like International Day of Forests and World Wetlands Day. These insights also helped us improve our day-to-day communication activities for Superb, since it informs us how Twitter users associate the subject matter to different issues and campaigns. How about the Twitter engagement around at the European level? So for this, we collaborated with students at King's College London who supported us in answering different questions we had, including what is the most engaged content about forest restoration in Europe, looking at the period of 2018 and 2021. So for this, we used a mix of keywords related to forest restoration, Europe, and demo site countries to collect over 795,000 tweets in English. From this exploration, we found out that a tweet by Greta Thunberg was the most engaged content throughout the entire data collection period, which called to remove forest biomass from the EU Renewable Energy Directive. So in a nutshell, a narrative critical towards forest biomass was the most visible content in European level English language Twitter conversation around forest restoration. Generic and European level insights gave us useful background, but what could we find out when we narrowed our data collection point to a more local site where restoration activities are actually taking place? To make this as localized as possible, we collaborated with restoration site partners of Superb to develop the location and issue keyword sets in the local language, following this iterative process. We used different location names, including cities, villages, towns, along with issue keywords to filter the data for each site. And using these data sets, we looked at different elements, including which issues surfaced around forest restoration sites through Twitter hashtags. Despite the nature of restoration sites are quite different from one another, these 3 sites where restoration activities are taking place under Superb shared something in common, which is a strong public concern around wildfires, dominating the top hashtag list, along with biodiversity issues. In the case of the Spanish restoration site, not only bear-related issues came up, but also bird-related issues calling for the protection of specific bird species appeared on the top hashtag list. Climate change impacts were also addressed, including forest pests, drought, and its impacts on crops. And in relation to crops, chestnuts were most visible among the hashtags and on the hashtag list, often being brought up in the climate change context in individual tweets. In the French case, we also saw climate issues, including heat, drought, and the type of storm specific to the region. And public interests in wildlife were also expressed in hashtags, naming specific animals like deers, boars, and wolves. When zooming into the Dutch site, while there was a strong public association to the site as the site of nature and biodiversity protection, we also saw several hashtags associated with the conflicts between those promoting nature protection and those with agricultural interests. Nitrogen issues, which is high on the national public agenda at the moment, was, for example, one of the top issues at the local level. And there were many other public concerns, including the presence of drug lab in the area, the local opposition to build a new biomass plant, and the risk of high water. And now I turn it over to Liliana for the YouTube analysis.
Thank you, Rina. So Rina just presented a few projects that take Twitter as a site of study. And in addition to Twitter, we also looked at other platforms. So we also looked at YouTube and Google Images, which is what I will be talking about now. The first project that I'll be talking about is about mapping forest restoration on YouTube. And one of the questions that we explored in this project was, how is forest restoration represented in videos shared on YouTube? We collected over 600 YouTube videos that contain forest restoration related keywords. And this time, we looked at the Italian language space. And these videos were collected over the course of 1 year, so 2022. On this slide, you can see the queries that we used to collect these videos, and these queries were developed drawing on input from our superb demo site partners. One of the analyses that we did with this set of over 600 videos was to explore thematic alignments between videos. To do this, we used the labels that video producers added to these videos, for example, to describe the themes covered in the videos and to make the videos more easily discoverable on YouTube. What you see on the slide is a network of associations between videos and thematic tags. This allows us to explore the main themes in the most viewed YouTube videos containing forest restoration keywords in Italian. And I will go through some of the main clusters of this network one by one. One of the major clusters in the network features videos that are demos or advertising for reforestation projects in Italy, mostly financed by private companies. Another cluster of videos in this network is about reforestation projects that are taking place abroad, for example, in the Amazon, but that are still funded or managed by Italian organizations and companies. For example, some of these videos were about projects financed by the Catholic Church. In this network, there is also a cluster of video lectures, webinars, and interviews with experts on particular restoration techniques. So syntropic farming featured in these videos, and also the Miyawaki method. Another interesting cluster is made of videos of farming simulator games. So these are generally long videos of gamers streaming while they play farming simulator games. And these games were featuring practices of tree planting and reforestation. Finally, there is also a cluster of historical videos with fascist era propaganda about reforestation projects. In these videos, reforestation is framed as part of the National Reconstruction Plan and the way to obtain economic independence from other countries. So that was the Mapping a Forest Restoration on YouTube project in Italian language. Now we're going back to English language, and we are also moving from YouTube to Google Images. And the final project I would like to mention before handing over to Jonathan is a project done by one of our team members, Gabriele Colombo, with students in his design classes at Politecnico di Milano. This project looked at forest restoration in Google Images. And the question that the students asked was, how are human-forest relationships portrayed in Google image search results for forest restoration? The students collected over 1,000 images with 40 different forest restoration-related keywords, and they manually categorized them. One of the results of this was a beautiful digital archive called Plant Forward, which is available online. And one of the things that this archive does is to enable users to explore how various life cycle phases of forest restoration are visually depicted in Google Images, and also to explore human presence and absence in different forest life cycle phases. And I will now hand over to Jonathan.
So, as we mentioned earlier, our contribution to Superb is part of the project's work on engagement, communication, and outreach. So we're also interested in possibilities for designing playful forest society interfaces, which invite reconsideration of forest life and forest restoration. So in particular, we've been looking at how we can go beyond graphs and data visualizations of the kind that we've just been showing you towards other forms of creative redisplay of online texts, images, videos, sounds, and other materials for collective interpretation and exploration. So just to emphasize, this is not just about us as researchers presenting findings and results, but also thinking about ways in which we can creatively bring materials related to forests and forest restoration to various publics for them to explore and interpret for themselves and make meaning from in different ways. So, for example, we've been thinking of how to display online material to invite consideration of how search engines shape forest sites. So say you wanted to search for web pages related to one of the forest restoration sites related to the Superb project, such as Queen Elizabeth Forest Park, which is one of the demo sites. As I'm sure many of you have noticed, when you search for a term, say on Google Images, you often get suggestions for related searches, as you can see here and here highlighted. So these place names designate different locations, different places with different kinds of meanings, associations, and communities, as well as giving a sense of how people interact with these places online. So as you can see here, we find pubs, lodges, visitor centres, water parks, and other things which are associated with place names from this site. So to investigate this, we created this project which surfaces different forest names using what we call associative query snowballing, that is starting with a list of names and following these and documenting them and listing the recommendations for other associated place names. And this is a way to elicit different kinds of names associated with the site, as well as getting a sense of how these names are used online. So once we have these names, our next question is, how do search engines shape a site? What kinds of pages come up? What kinds of accounts of a forest restoration site or a forest site can be found? And is there a way of reorganizing and redisplaying results to provide different perspectives on the life of a forest or of a forest restoration site? So while Google famously aims to index the web, showing the most relevant results close to the top of the search bar, we wanted to socially unpack, unindex and re-index these results to consider how different kinds of web pages are ordered and other ways of ordering them. And we did this through a series of catalogs based on searches related to Queen Elizabeth Forest Park as a test. So these explore, for example, how the web invites different kinds of relationships with forest places. So it invites you to relate to the place as a tourist, as an adventurer, as a holidaymaker, a customer, a citizen scientist, and so on, as well as seeing the prevalence of these different kinds of invitations and relationships, and inviting readers to look through different kinds of texts from across different web pages associated with these sites in Google search results. So we took a similar approach with images, exploring how images represent a place where restoration is happening. So one of the things we did was to identify images which indicate how forest sites are socialized or made public as places to walk, to stay, to buy, to navigate, to be informed about. As you can see here, through things such as watermarks or maps or signage or bridges, walkways, this kind of thing. And also we looked at news search results, when one can observe different kinds of public narratives and issues related to the forest sites as well as forest restoration, including the site being described as a hidden gem, a place of great adventure, or a camping spot, as well as issues related to animals and rewilding. And we're documenting these kinds of approaches so they can be reused by other sites in the future, as well as writing them up in this forthcoming paper, which will be out in Cultural Geographies. So on to some very recent work. As part of a fellowship and research visit at the University of Potsdam, we had a workshop the week before last, bringing together artists, researchers, and technologists to explore different ways of reusing or repurposing forest media to describe the kinds of questions that Liliana was raising earlier. So in particular, we set out to explore what arts-based media repurposing techniques or reusing techniques can bring to engaged research on ecological politics and ecological sites. So we explored different kinds of open source tools and online materials as indicated in this, this big diagram. And we used a tool for making supercut videos as one of the things that we were exploring. So supercut videos are a type of video which compile new videos from clips of a collection of videos, such as a selection of videos associated with a given query on YouTube, as Liliana was mentioning earlier. And the supercut itself, in this case, is based on a particular set of keywords which can be found in the video transcripts. So, for example, we took some of the most viewed YouTube videos about forest restoration, those viewed over 1 million times, and queried them using this video grep tool and produced supercuts around different kinds of themes and questions. So, for example, we asked, where are people appearing or being mentioned in forest restoration videos, and how are they scripted, as a way to explore forest-society relations? So let's have a quick look at some very preliminary explorations and work in progress. So here's a clip from a supercut on peopling forest restoration.
Life people have here change lives.
What is people in the street walking fast? There's people in the street I'll never get to meet. These
people in Xinjiang grow vegetables without rain. People very rich. And so, in recent people partake in this noble event every People's Republic of China was even forced.
People that all want to be people who know how to work with the people's country. But I have my own people's ancestry to draw on, and we all people somewhere in the world.
So that was people. We also asked what kinds of non-human entities are prominent in forest restoration videos and how. So here's a little clip on flora.
Fighting garlic, onions, watermelons, fruits fight
Blackberries, 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 fruiting, blackberries.
Fight succulent, mustard, broccoli, fennel, succulents, fruit.
Bamboo, aloe,
fruits,
orchards,
bananas, mushrooms,
potatoes, blackberries, orchard,
bananas, potatoes,
papaya, guavas, ginger, turmeric,
bananas,
potato, fruit, potato, cucumber, banana.
Fighting, firefighters,
figure, mesquite,
fight, orange, fruit, orange, fruit, orange, fig, oranges, orange, fruity, orange, coffee, berry, coffee.
So you can see lots of oranges, lots of coffee. So here's another one on fauna, just to give you a sense of a different query.
Possum, goats, mammals, owls, goats.
Oak livestock, turtles, insects,
fishing, horns, sheep, swine, sheep,
Horses,
pigs, livestock,
Penguins, fish,
Horse, soaking butterfly, shellfish.
soaking,
Leopard,
insects, fish, mammals, fish, insects, mammals, kingfishers, fish, insects, snails, fish, snails, mammals, insects, fish, pannonia, sticks, mammals, toad.
So that gives you a sense of just a couple of things that we tried. So as well as supercuts based on the transcripts, which arrange clips sequentially in time, we also explored different ways of making scene-based video composites and arranging them spatially. So this format is inspired by the filmmaker Agnes Varda, who in her video works draws inspiration from polyptych painting panels, as you can see here. So there's Agnes Varda's work on the right and the painting panels on the left. So we have been curious whether we could use this kind of format to explore different themes in forest restoration videos as a way to display some of these themes and highlight them. So with artist and researcher Sam Levine, who made the video crep tool that we were using, we also have been prototyping a video compositing tool for creating video grids, using the following steps to manually code themes in a selection of videos, and then using this new tool to display video scenes in this kind of polyptych format. So we'll just show you a couple of examples. This is one exploring the agents and work of forest restoration, as you can see here. So as well as work, we were looking at the role of diagrams, maps, models, and visualizations in forest restoration videos. And this is English language videos with more than 1 million views, which you can see here. So we also drew on previous projects we have done, such as ways of listening to forests, where we explored 4 different modes of forest listening, from forest bathing, field recording, sonification, and storytelling, which is part of the Critical Zones exhibition in Karlsruhe, co-curated by the late Bruno Latour and the late Peter Weibel, as well as a recent project on forestscapes funded by the UK National Environmental Research Council, which explores how generative soundscaping techniques can be used to support interdisciplinary encounters and engagement around ecological and environmental research. So the idea is that you start with a folder of sounds from different sources, whether that's field recordings or online sounds, and you develop composition techniques, which can be used to layer them and present them together, as well as using custom soundscaping software in order to generate these evolving landscapes, which are composed with custom scripts using the open source Super Collider software and the open source Norns hardware. And we've been working with artists and researchers to explore different approaches to organizing collective listening moments in different contexts. So we had a pilot listening lab last week at Republica 2023, which is the Digital Society Festival in Berlin. And we're currently exploring further soundscapes with Queen Elizabeth Forest Park in Scotland, including the possibility of on-site listening activities and installations. And we're looking at using field recordings, which have been taken from different sites in order to listen to different phases of forest restoration, as well as online sounds from YouTube and other social media platforms in order to situate where restoration is taking place. So I'll very briefly show you a couple of clips from these soundscapes. So this is the first on listening to forest restoration. Here's a quick preview of online sounds. You can hear different kinds of public activities, such as sports, camera clicks, voices, giving a sense of the social and ecological ambient of the broader sound.
That's tough going. I'm following you, or trying to.
I can hear Mr. Santa Cruz bumping along behind me.
We actually did a reintroduction of water voles. Around 1,000 animals were released into a number of sites across
lovely. Recreating habitats like wildflower meadows and that sort of thing.
Why are they so important to the wood?
So that was a bit of a preview of some of the different creative display formats that we've been exploring. We'll conclude with some brief reflections and next steps. So what might studying forest media practices contribute to forest restoration upscaling? In this talk, we reviewed a series of different kinds of digital media and digital methods projects for exploring how forests and forest restoration are articulated with the web and social media. Knowing more about the situations or the context of forest restoration may change how we think about what success looks like, how it might happen, as well as learning around how forest restoration upscaling can be pursued and how it can involve various actors who have a relationship with the place. So just to highlight a few of the areas of learning and collective inquiry before we move on to questions and discussion. Some of the things we've been looking at are online narratives around forest restoration, different forms of online participation around forest restoration and communication around restoration, different ways in which forests are valued and different ways in which forest restoration can be valued, different ways of broadening and diversifying publics and supporters of forest restoration work, exploring different formats which invite social engagement, identifying new opportunities for upscaling, and looking at different kinds of online resources to support upscaling, as well as who and what these may gather. So in the context of Superb, here is where we are in the process. And the next steps include finishing the first phase of online mapping work that we've been doing, documenting the recipes and approaches that we've been using so they can be used by others, working towards a transformative narrative guide with Rina and other colleagues at the EFI, and finally exploring the possibility of using some of these soundscaping and video compositing approaches for creatively redisplaying restoration. So I'm going to briefly hand over to Rina for some final reflections before we move into discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Jonathan. So as a final wrap, I also wanted to share a few words about how this work also connects back to Superb's overall aim, which is to offer systemic solutions for upscaling ecosystem restoration. The whole idea of incorporating online mapping or the analysis like this into Superb came from the fact that public discourses can significantly alter the future of restored forests and ecosystems. But projects like these can easily undermine the importance of people in making a systems change. Many times only the specific types of stakeholders that we consider important are taken into account without making much efforts in getting a holistic picture of who else are out there influencing the public debates. We've learned this from the experience in the Białowieża forest in Poland, where local communities were caught by surprise when the sheer amount of pressure from Warsaw and elsewhere reached the forest they were living in. The pressure to stop doing basically what the local communities wanted to do. So social media was one of the places where discussions were taking place, but the local communities were not really aware of the impacts these could make on the future of their forests. So listening to what people are seeing and feeling online is really important to make upscaling work a big success. And this is why we'll be developing different kinds of resources, as Jonathan mentioned, that help anyone working in the restoration project test and try different techniques like the ones you saw, maybe not in the full-fledged version, but in this talk, so that the public engagement work could adapt to the change and make impacts even beyond the project period. On that note, I think, thank you so much for listening. And I think it's time for Q&A, so I will pass the floor to Gesha.
Thank you very much for this very, very inspiring presentation. Quite unusual use of images as well. I think people are actually surprised, I suppose, and I especially liked the videos and how they were presented. So I wonder how we can work with that. Also when developing the transformative narrative guide, which was already mentioned. And we don't have any questions in the Q&A. So I think our audience is just maybe a little overwhelmed because most of them are probably not used to the methods, the digital humanities methods. But and there's a question, but before we take the question, as a general information, I think what is quite particular about our work in Superb is that we will develop this transformative narrative guide, which should really be a toolkit for practitioners to develop their own narratives on forest restoration and engage with the audiences they would like to engage with, and maybe also engage with audiences they are not aware of, that they are kind of influencing the debates. That we will base this on on sound research, which is not what we in communication do in general. We have our practices, we have our experiences, we have our tools, but most of the time we don't have this communication research component integrated into a project. So I think this is quite particular and quite cool. And we have a question in the chat. And I have to say, I don't completely understand, but probably it's a person who is working in digital humanities. I will see if it works with a promotion. So maybe you can ask the question yourself. Yeah, okay. So is Awais already? Yeah, wonderful. No, sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. It seemed that Awais is out. Okay, please ask your question live. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Can you please introduce yourself and maybe also put the video on? That would be really nice.
Yeah, so my name is Awais.
Awais.
I'm associated with academia, and I'm from Pakistan. So my question is that this social network analysis that has been done across different platforms, including Google and YouTube and Twitter. So would it be useful to actually have a unified approach where across platform, the results that you have actually obtained, if they can be integrated, to what extent that would actually be done, and what's your opinion about that? Would that be useful or not? Like the analysis which you have done on Twitter, how would that correspond to what you have done related to YouTube, and then the video scraps and all the supercuts and stuff like that? So is there a way of like getting a unified view of the work that is being done so far? Yeah, so that's what. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that question. It's a really good one, and I think so. We do usually you study issues across platforms, as you saw, in terms of getting a more unified view, or I guess we could say in terms of maybe comparing how issues are represented on different types of platforms. That is something that from a media studies perspective, there are a number of issues and problems that emerge there, and which need to be taken into account if you would be attempting to do a comparison. So as digital media researchers, we are very much interested in the platforms themselves and how the technology shapes practices. So, for example, we pay careful attention to the features of each platform. And one question that we would ask ourselves if we were to make a comparison would be, for example, is a Twitter hashtag the same as a, say, Instagram hashtag? And the answer is no. They aren't the same, because each platform has different specifications. So typically, in a tweet, you would be using a smaller number of hashtags, whereas on Instagram, you would be using an enormous number of hashtags, which means that Twitter and Instagram hashtags should not be treated the same. And the same goes with the way in which algorithms, say ranking algorithms, shape what content gets visibility on each platform. So I think that for that reason, we may be able to say some things about how the same issue, say forest restoration, is represented on Twitter versus Instagram versus YouTube. But at the same time, it's important to bear in mind that we are really talking about different platforms with very different features, and that they play a very important role in what ends up being the content that we are studying, basically what ends up being our data set.
I guess just to briefly add to that, it's been really fascinating thinking, even just finding the names of the sites, right? Like the sites are so different. They're so different in size, in scale, in public access, in ownership. And that's just within one project. So thinking carefully about how things are named in itself is a really kind of challenging but interesting thing to take seriously, because the people who go to a site might have a different name for the place that they go to than what appears on a map or what appears on a funding or policy document. But as a twist, the ways that platforms treat places can also be quite different. So looking at what constitutes a place on Instagram, right? You remember sometimes when you tag a picture, you have like a drop-down menu, you can kind of select place names. Like, so what makes it onto those kinds of lists is very interesting. But similarly with issues, like thinking how would you start to figure out keywords related to a particular kind of restoration issue in one language, let alone in all of the languages that we have across the European countries. So I think a lot of these really kind of subtle questions of naming, of language, I think also deserve to be taken seriously and to be taken slowly, rather than just aiming towards the kind of more unified view, which you risk sort of losing things as well. But I think cross-platform analysis is generally how we do it. So comparing how these issues play out across different platforms. But great question.
Thanks, Jonathan and Liliana. We also have a question from our superb project coordinator, Magda.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations for the presentation. It's really also a new big window for me. Like I'm a user for many of these platforms, and this is also the question that keeps coming back. How effective are we in communicating and what to communicate and etc. So I have a list maybe of 20 questions. I will not ask all of them today, but I will be reaching out to you from different, but I'm just asking, Liliana was highlighting the difference between the different platform features. And also from my side, I believe that the people that are using this different platform are not the same. So people are using Instagram, like are younger, different type. For Twitter are more professional or more activist. So how much do you relate with this content and go back to people and see, okay, this community or this age part of this maybe, you know, bring it back to people, to society, and see how different, I don't know how you call them, I'll call a cluster of people are reacting. So do you go to this analysis and do you have anything to share at this point?
Yes, so that is a very, very good question that indeed highlights, I think, so in our discipline, the way in which we understand social media platforms is similar to what Jonathan presented in one of the slides, but it's always a combination of technical features of the platform, which can be everything from ranking algorithms to what kind of tagging is permitted for a social media post. But so technical features, use cultures of the platform. So that was the component that you were referring to, which is very, very important. And thirdly, the practices of the producers, content producers on each platform. So the content that we get, so that which we study, is always the result of interactions between those three different elements. And those interactions, and that is why we refer to social media platforms as socio-technical systems, each of them having a very specific platform culture. So the way in which the cultures of use part, so what you are asking about, which we would refer to as the use culture of a platform. So the way in which that surfaces in our studies is through the study of content. We are able to tell. So when we study content, we typically also study the profile of the users posting it. So we are able to say something about use culture. So who engages with a topic on a particular platform, based on a combination of studying the profile of the users posting it, as well as elements of content. So sometimes the hashtags may be an indication of the type of user posting as well.
I guess it's really also interesting to think how methods are involved in describing communities, right? It's such an interesting question. Also, it's been studied for a long time. For example, take surveys and polls. Like, the idea is, like, historical studies have looked at how those don't only kind of represent the world, but they're also used to make communities legible, right? In very specific ways. So things like you're asking about, like demographic features, become legible through polling techniques. So a lot of what we depend on to understand who uses different platforms are also market studies of user bases on different platforms, the social media reports on how platforms are used across different countries. So we're kind of partly depending on some of these large-scale studies and reports from the companies themselves or from industry to see what those kinds of user bases are like. And it's interesting that the sort of knowledge that you can get from studying social media has been described as post-demographic, partly because, as you know, when you sign up to use Instagram, they don't always ask you for all of the demographic information that you might get in a poll, which makes some things challenging, but it also brings other kinds of units of analyzing communities and populations, which is extremely interesting. So, for example, there's a wonderful piece by the artist Sam Levine, who we're working with, called The Infinite Campaign, which looks at how Twitter makes people legible. And it's like, you live in a house with 3 other people, or, you know, you buy dog food. So there's all sorts of emerging ways in which people are rendered legible through not only the social media platforms, but also advertising tracking networks and other things, which of course we pay close attention to. I think in many cases, it's not straightforward to get detailed demographic data associated with platform content for the kinds of recipes that we're looking at with forest practitioners and others in the first instance. But it's a great question. Certainly something to pay attention to.
Thanks very much. I raised my hand. I know I'm the moderator anyway, but I also want to ask a question. And this question relates to the challenges that you're facing in your work, because I can imagine, and we've also discussed it internally already, but it might be interesting for the audience as well. Because I'm aware that when you do when you do the research in Superb and you study the different demo sites, which are all over Europe. We have 12 demo sites. And in those countries or locations, not everyone uses the same social media. We know, for instance, that Twitter in our Romanian demo site is used very little, but then maybe Facebook is used more. So how do you respond to that? How do you reflect on that in your work?
That's a really good question, and also very timely, especially now with the recent takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk, which has completely changed the landscape of social media research. So Twitter used to be one of the most used platforms for academic research, partly for reasons of accessibility. So as you're mentioning, so there are a number of different factors that inform decisions about what platforms to study. And as you well mentioned, one of these factors is which platforms are actually being used to speak about the issue, or the way we usually phrase it is, where is the issue actually happening? So is the issue happening more on Instagram, or more on Twitter, or more on TikTok? And that really varies a lot from issue to issue. So that is one of the factors that shapes decisions. And at the same time, another crucial factor is, what data can we have access to? And here, doing social media research is a roller coaster, and things change so rapidly every year. So what we are able to work with depends very much on API access conditions from platforms. It depends also on how frequently these platforms are being changed, which often means that we need to update the software tools that we work with. It depends on changes in privacy protections of each platform, and so on. So yeah, and this sometimes in practical terms means having to take difficult decisions. So indeed in the case in the Romanian case, where which we've worked on recently, Facebook is the most used social media platform in Romania. At the same time, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, so this has already been for a few years now, Facebook has completely shut down API access for academic research. So it is very, very difficult to do Facebook research at the moment. So when we are faced with these kinds of situations, we have to go down the list and say, what is the next platform which meets the criteria of being used and data being accessible. And I think in our field as a whole, another way in which researchers are responding to the increasing restricted access to platform data is by changing methods. So we have typically relied on data collected via APIs over the last few years. Now there is a return to scraping. So simply trying to scrape data from the Twitter web interface, from the Facebook web interface, and that is not reliable. And that's also difficult because the platforms have put things in place to make sure that, for example, from Facebook, it's very difficult to do web scraping. So then there is also a third technique that we use, which is maybe more return to online ethnography, so more observational methods that collect less structured data, as well as a fourth method, which we wrote about and use in other project, is called the research persona method. So where you set up an account, a research account on a platform, and you populate it with content that you're interested in studying as a way to make observations about the kinds of content that the users of that particular platform receive around a particular topic. And that's also a technique that journalists are starting to use to study how social media users encounter misinformation online.
I guess just to very briefly follow on from that, I have a proposal for a fun exercise, which everyone can do to kind of delve into some of these things. So I guess if there's one thing to take from this talk, if you're not involved in Superb and you're kind of interested in how the web and social media may be involved in enabling people to find out about work that you're doing or issues that you're working on, I guess the first step is to think of a set of keywords which relate to your sites, your practices, your projects, and you can make a long list. But it's even that in itself, like thinking what might people be looking for when they're trying to understand about the work that you're doing or the work that you're kind of committed to. And the second thing is, it's very simple, but just trying out on the different online interfaces that we all have and use, like, the little query boxes, just putting in some of these things and seeing what comes back. And I think, it's often just that in itself is a sort of learning process, right? Like what kinds of things show up. And then as you go through, you'll notice who's present and what is present and what is absent and what is missing. Who's prominent and who's marginal, right? Like, so those sorts of things will come up. And then probably the most difficult bit is then to think what kinds of questions could be meaningfully addressed using these kinds of materials, and how could that be useful for the work you're doing. If you get that far and you're interested, we'd very warmly welcome any and all email contact for how to move forward with things like tools and suggestions for gathering this material more systematically and so on. But that is an exercise that I think will just give you a taste of how projects and issues that you're working on appear across different online spaces as a way into this type of research.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think we will also integrate that to a certain extent into the transformative narrative guide to give some guidance on how you can do those queries yourself. And just as a kind of a small anecdote, when I started working with Rina, we found out that one of the most prominent actors on Twitter when it comes to forests and biodiversity is actually Leonardo DiCaprio. And since then, we are trying to get him as a follower. We haven't managed yet, but we will continue working on that. And now we have a last question for Magda, and afterwards, I think we need to wrap up. But yeah, Magda, you still have the floor because we have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I mean, this transformative narrative is really what we are keen to have. Like in one of Liliana's slides, she asked a lot of questions. And this is really what we are looking for. Like as user, as a project coordinator, what we want from this kind of study is to see what's happening on the ground, who is the audience, how they are reacting, to be informed and see what's happening on the ground. But on the other side, what we want also is to be more impactful and how to reach to them, how to reply to this, and how to be effective. So I have here two small questions about, is there any scientific study on how people react on posts? Like, is it the same weight for when people see and don't react, when they like, when they repost, when they cite, when they just repost with a comment? So how do you account for this in your analysis? And the second one, how effective is it to be catastrophic in our message, like show something really bad or burning, or something, a positive thing, like look what we achieved? Which one is more effective? Which we should combine both, or be more positive or be more negative to engage people with us and to get our messages across? And the third one, about how useful can be social media to get specific people reply to questionnaire, for example. Is this something a useful tool or just useless? Do you have any kind of info for these 3 points? And if it's too long, just be brief, and then we can mingle outside.
Yes, I can try to have a go briefly. So yeah, those are all really good questions, which I think really affect day-to-day work in communication, and really wanting to understand what it is that you're seeing when you do social media studies. So I guess in relation to the first question, so there are empirical studies that are being done by researchers in our area that look at the kinds of things that you're interested in. So for example, I worked with a student this year who was looking at what does it mean to save a post on Instagram, and how is the save post feature being used, and what are the different functions that this feature plays. Similarly, there are studies being done on different kinds of platforms to see how different features are being used and what meanings are ascribed to them by social media users. Because typically what platforms try to do is to fix the meaning of a feature so that then it can be smoothly converted into data that can be used by the advertising partners and by different stakeholders of that platform. But in practice, what often happens is that users might push against the meaning of the function inscribed by the platform. So they might resist it or they might transform it. So for example, a study done by one of our colleagues already a few years ago was looking at the different meanings and uses of Twitter's at that time bookmark function. And it was basically showing that it was actually being used in two entirely different ways. So it was used as a way to, so one of them was to in order to cite content, and the other function, I can't remember it right now, but in any case they were very different, which means that when you are doing metrics with this feature, you are actually not counting the same things. You are counting very different practices. So that is why I guess we advertise for a slow approach to digital media research that combines qualitative and quantitative research, so that you can understand how these features are being used alongside doing engagement counts and so on.
I guess just to add to that, it's a really good question, right? Like how we should respond to the dynamics of platforms, like in relation to, for example, the Amazon fires work we did. You can see very clearly what kinds of things do well, and you can see amongst the things that were doing very well. Like, for example, images that were not related to the events that were being reported upon, which could be considered in some sense misleading, or at least, there's image recycling happening, but which is leading to kind of very highly engaged content. But also a lot of the things that we saw were kind of stock images and images from other contexts to do with burning planets and animals and this kind of thing. Certainly, I think it's important to pay attention to the specificities of platform cultures and to consider carefully what role those different sorts of spaces might play in relation to what you're interested in doing, but also particularly the kinds of relationships that you want to develop. So not just thinking in terms of reach, but thinking in terms of relationships which might invite a kind of more situated and contextual approach to how one uses these different kinds of platforms and how one engages in these different sorts of potentially viral kind of digital cultures or kind of meme cultures and so on. But I also think there's a lot to be learned, and it can be very rewarding to see how culture is developing in these different kinds of spaces, and to experiment a bit and to think what might be appropriate for, again, the kinds of relationships that would be meaningful around forest restoration work.
Yes, and I guess on the question on basically what kind of messaging and the use of catastrophic language are a more positive one. So on that one, I can share a study. So it's not something that I am working on, but I know of a paper that is that has looked at precisely this question. It's in relation to climate change, but it might be useful to give a sense of the impact of catastrophic versus more positive messaging when it comes to environmental issues.
A lot of the YouTube videos are actually very hopeful, interestingly. the ones towards the top, I think.
Yeah, thanks. We just had an internal workshop today on storytelling, and we all agreed that we need to provide solutions, and we need people to be able to engage and to be aware that every action counts in a way, instead of feeling hopeless and, you know, like completely useless, because then this will kind of lead to resignation and we won't make any changes with resignated people. So I think that's why it makes a lot of sense to integrate the hope and the opportunities for people to make the change and add their individual contribution to a bigger picture. Actually, we need to finish now, but there was a very good last minute question in the Q&A. So I won't promote you because this will make it too complicated, but the question is from Lawrence, and he's asking how you were able to distinguish forest restoration from normal afforestation practices people post on Twitter. And did you after all?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Lawrence. So, and I think that that relates to one stage of research design, which is query design. So where we would be, or the first place where we would be addressing that would be at the query design stage, where we'd be deciding if afforestation is one of the keywords that we're using to gather data or not. And I guess then if afforestation is something that we decide that we do not want to cover in the study or does not relate, or our research question needs to be restricted to forest restoration, then we could also, the data could also be filtered to remove any posts that mention both forest restoration and afforestation. So say afforestation related content could still make it into the data set if a tweet contained both the keyword forest restoration and afforestation. And that is where like a difficult decision needs to be taken about, do we want to remove afforestation, but that also means losing the forest restoration practices that are mentioned together with afforestation or not. But otherwise, yeah, so it's basically through keyword design that this is being resolved.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you also for taking the final question. Now it's time for us to wrap it up. I think we all learned a lot about what is possible in digital humanities research, what is happening online that we were not aware of, and also a little bit about what we can do or do better. And we will, of course, have more updates on that once we've developed the transformative narrative guide, which is a work in progress, and we will definitely present something already next year. So it's not such a long time to go. We will have a summer break of the forest restoration webinar series now, but we will soon announce new dates, speakers, topics, etc. And if you follow us on Twitter or check out the website, you will find out about the next webinar sessions. And in case you're doing your own query and you get inspired and you want to share the results or questions with Liliana, Jonathan, and Rina, then you can definitely find them online and approach them. So thank you very much for a quite engaging session with a lot of videos and also a nice diversity of speakers, which was really, really, really light in a way, but also deep with regards to the content. So I think we all enjoyed it a lot, and have a nice rest of the afternoon, and we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.